Good morning, everybody. Or good afternoon in some cases. Thanks for joining me on this fourth webinar in our series around evaluating strategically rather than just constantly. This is part 4, and I thought today would be useful to really have a sort of a catch-up or sort of a roundup of where we are, or a summary of where we are before we start maybe exploring some of the toolkits in greater depth. One of the things we've been busy with behind the scenes is putting together some online materials and online resources, and these will be capable of being bought in or subscribed to or joined in with in some stages. And from that you can subscribe to some online coaching and guidance to help you with some of the concepts. As today is mostly a summary, then it's going to be more of an overview of some of the things we've talked about. And I'm conscious that we do scoot through a lot of different concepts. I'm going to go a bit slower today, and hopefully in a little bit more depth if needed. But obviously the purposes of these webinars is just to give you a bit of an overview of the subject. So today, a bit about us, obviously, quick pulling together, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, of what we're all about, and then what we're all about. And this is us. QED Evaluation incorporates trainingevaluation.com, which is a company that was founded last year, and we decided to bring it within the core brand, as QED is all about change and evaluation of that change, and some of that evaluations around learning and development, as well as other forms of business activity as well. And part of what we do is build resilience in people as well, so both organisational and L&D functional resilience, and evaluation is a key point in putting all those different things together. So we're an organisational development consultancy. We specialise in training evaluation. Unlike a lot of people, we don't sell any software. And really what we do is help coach, guide, consult with you to produce the situation or the context you need to drive the evaluation you want. We call ourselves your critical friend, and I always say it's better to have us criticising you or helping working with you to develop you than someone who's perhaps more hostile or thinking of a leveraged buyer or something along those lines. So we work with you to prove your value rather than justifying whether there should be value, because we already know there is it. And this is the model we have. We look at the top 2 quadrants, competence and engagement, as the critical or the most important things that L&D do, and we want to encourage L&D to move to these 2 areas as the point of evaluation. A, because we can use a different method. B, because it gives us all the information we need to prove the bottom 2 things, and also because most organisations don't need the bottom 2 things to be proven. However, in terms of a strategy, in terms of our evaluation strategy, it's key that we're able to measure or define competence, engagement, but also quantify and measure risk and KPIs. And those KPIs can sometimes be things like large organizational KPI change, like customer service or cultural change. And sometimes they are more risk-based, depending on the sort of organization you're in. If you're in travel or transport or financial services, a mandatory element of what you do is important. And sometimes just knowing that you've ticked the box because people have been on courses is important. I've been doing some online training recently, and what was very interesting is that the measure for this was just having attended the training. And so actually, in terms of having amended the same, it was really easy. The fact that I clicked through every bit of it and didn't do any of it seemed to be irrelevant. What mattered was had I got to the end and generated the certificate. And one of our challenges here in evaluation is how we can stiffen our evaluation process to make the learning content more sticky, and make sure that actually there's some value coming from the learning. Because what we don't want to do is devalue our own learning environment. And we want to change the culture of learning to make it more learner-centric and make sure all the parties in learning are engaged. So that's our model. I think I've talked a little bit about that already. So we split them into, as you say, slightly different shape here, but the competence and engagement side's on the right-hand side. And what matters here is that we look at forecasting as a method to generate the results. And on the left-hand side, the 2 quadrants there, we use summative or after the event evaluation to generate the results. And we use a range of different scores. And within those strategies, once you've decided where your budget sits, how you want to evaluate things, you can then decide the key stages that sit within them. And the 4 I's we've talked about in previous webinars. But this is all about making sure we commission the right solution to the need that exists, and making sure that we're just not having a bland or generic training offer that people sort of flop around within. And I was talking to someone the other day who said I worked as a receptionist for 20 years, and every year my boss looks in the training catalogue and says, "Do you fancy your presentation skills?" And she says, "Well, I don't do any presentations." And he said, "Well, it might help." And she never goes on them. She never does any development. And it just seems a slight indictment of that whole process. And how we work together with our partners in HR sometimes and in the line is really quite important. And this commissioning stage, I know a lot of you say you push back into the line when they ask you for like a negotiation skills course, and you say things like, "Well, why?" And they just say, "We don't know really, just want a course." And I think what's interesting is since HR and L&D came together about 20 years ago by using this new business partner model, as it was in the time, L&D can risk seeing themselves more as a service provider than a consultancy or a business partner. And it's quite interesting that a lot of operational managers really believe they're absolute experts in, well, some would say everything, but particularly in learning. And I think we undervalue our own expertise in learning and development to be able to really push the organisation back and say, actually, well, what is it you need? And I've met many people who do this very successfully. And I think sometimes because of the nature of L&D and the nature of valuation, what you sometimes end up with is a feeling that you just have to do as you're told rather than add value. And I think that's something we need to change in L&D. It's time the OD practitioner toolkit was deployed within L&D to really add some value again. And I suppose I'm in a bit of a position to do that. So some of the key questions in L&D we should be asking ourselves, really to summarise some of the other things that we've talked about, is why am I evaluating? What do I want to know? And this is really interesting because too often people say to me, in fact, I was working with an organisation quite recently and talking about financial ROI, and they said to me, "Russell, we don't need financial ROI." I said, "Fine. Well, what is it you want to know?" And it said, "We want to know whether people are learning." Well, that's fine. How do you mean want to know people are learning? We want to know whether the information we're giving them is sticking in their heads. Now, once that became the point of the evaluation, it was very simple to put the process behind that to make sure you could find that out. And actually what begins to happen is the more you think or use what we call decision science or decision theory to help us look at evaluation, the more we can have more of it within our own control and set things up correctly at the beginning. Now, it doesn't matter if you've got tons of courses running. It doesn't mean you can't, do some of this stuff. It just means you can now say, well, hang on a minute, let's take a pause, let's look at what we're doing, let's start making some of these decisions. Because you'll find there are maybe 40% of courses where you just want to know they're working. You don't need to know anything else. And maybe one or two where you need to deploy a really more sophisticated technique that generates some sort of more robust KPI-driven results. The point about the majority of people in L&D is we use one process to evaluate everything from the most sophisticated training, technology training, through to I'm going on a mindfulness course for half a day, through to this, I need to go on some mandatory training. If I don't get right, we'll get a massive fine in the organisation. We use one system, we use one approach, we use one process. And really what we're about today is to say, let's use a more strategic approach rather than doing everything the same way, and pick and choose what we evaluate and create steps in our evaluation strategy to build our credibility and give the organisation the information it may need to use. And if just because it's not asking for it today, it doesn't mean there won't be in the future. And it does take time to build up some of this information. So, start now. Why wait until you're asked and then just look embarrassed when you say, well, we've never really thought about proving the value of what we do. We've just been spending the money. And one L&D practitioner said to me recently, I've got a 100k budget, which is a great budget. The organisation needs to know that that money is better spent in L&D than it is by just giving people a pay rise. And that's a good point, isn't it? I wonder if all of us can do that. Anyway, I've banged that drum loud enough in the past, so moving on. So what method shall I use? That's the process to find out what you want to know. What targets exist for the training? Now, I use the concept of targets much more than learning objectives, because actually learning objectives on the whole are incredibly floppy. You can drive most of a bus through them because actually they're so vague. And actually organisations don't talk about learning objectives. They talk about, well, what is it we want to get? We want to move performance on a dial from X to Y, or we want to move something from a dial from X to Y. That's a target. You wouldn't sit in the sales department and say, well, what do we sort of fancy doing this month? We have specific targets, and then we measure accordingly and prioritise accordingly. And the key about any training is that at the end of the course, the L&D function should be setting the actions that lead to the impact. It's just too depressing when I go and look at courses and still at the end of it you say, well, what actions are you expecting? It says, well, whatever the learner wants to take away. Well, given the learner sometimes didn't even know they needed to go on the course, that's a problem, and it shows a lack of rigour in the sort of L&D process, which evaluation can help you stiffen up. So I'm very keen on actions and intentions, creating scores at the end of courses that allow you to decide what corrective action you can take to help make sure that learning is embedded, because embedding is absolutely key, and you need the managers on side. And many people say to me, but I've got on a course, but when I go back, my manager won't let me do this. Well, you've got to be thinking in L&D. Well, actually, what's interesting is I've been reading some interesting information about learning embedding as a concept recently, and what the information says is quite straightforwardly is that if you don't have embedding processes, you may as well not bother with the training. Now that's an issue for us, isn't it? Because most organisations aren't embedding well enough. They're not engaging managers, they're not engaging the learner. The learner, when you ask the learner what they're doing in a course today, they say, I'm on a course, I'm off, I'm not working today, even though they're being paid. The sort of culture of learning we've sort of lost somehow in this sort of serving up of courses for people just to come on. And the last question is, how will I check implementation? And of course, if you set a bunch of actions, dead easy. Have they been implemented? That's the simplest method we can use. So again, some of these questions help us link the issue or the decision that we want to make with a particular method or process. Now, we use our own process to drive this, and just about everything we do is predicted, because actually we've discovered that our forecast models are so accurate and so cost effective. Why would you bother doing summative evaluation? So for example, on a recent program, we forecast the accuracy of a course to within 94% of a full Phillips review, and their process costs 30 days of consulting time, and ours cost 2. You tell me which you'd rather have. But strangely enough, people still seem to love doing the after event. The unique process no other part of the organisation ever uses. We need to use the business processes that other operational managers use to help us move forward. But here's some hierarchical questions you ask yourself. This consultative element, this thinking through at the front of what we're doing in L&D, actually helps you become more strategic. It helps you consider where you want L&D to be positioned. I bumped into an organisation quite recently, and they were talking about a program or a series of programs. They wanted them to be considered as having an impact on the sort of customer service cultural change that was going on, but had no idea really that everything in the program wasn't the key or the sum total of activity that was going to actually achieve that change. And so they wanted to really be able to attribute value to the training that really didn't exist. And we have to get real about what the training really does. It sets people up at the point of leaving to be able to, or to intend to do something. But if they're not able to do that, or the training just can't be used straight away, so it gets forgotten, or it's never supported, or it's not embedded, well, you're wasting your money. And I'm becoming a firmer and firmer believer that the better we embed, the better we focus on predicting the intention scores of people leaving courses, the more likely it is that learning will take hold. And I'm really concerned about this as we roll forward, because we all have a vested interest in making sure that L&D is as vital tomorrow as it is today. So there are 3 choices basically in evaluation: forecasting, after the event, or meta, which is both. And of course we focus on the first because we see it as being as accurate and a hell of a lot more cost effective than the other ones. So there's some interesting concepts flipping around the sort of evaluation world at the moment. There's a lot of work around a balanced scorecard and process, and we use this concept a lot when we're thinking about behaviour. We sort of almost got rid of the Kirkpatrick idea that we should be focused on behaviours, because behaviour is really just part of a process chain, and we can manage process and measure process. It's very tricky to do that with behaviours. And believe you me, I'm a person with a long background in behavioural psychology, and for me to admit that, it's a problem. Probabilities, I think being able to talk about this, probability and likelihood and probability scoring is going to be really useful for us in terms of engaging with operational managers who talk in terms of probabilities all the time, and yet we don't. Wonder why. Paul Kearns he came up with this idea of baselining. Where are people before learning takes place? And I think it's part of the red herring of learning, which is you have to know where the person is in order to know where they are afterwards. But we don't actually think about what the value of the course is. We're always looking at the learner. We're always looking at the learner to pitch up, engage, and take all the actions away. And often the learner is the least engaged person in the process. And yet it's the L&D function that have to take the accountability. They get it in the neck. And it just seems to be a completely contrary concept that we would be baselining learners rather than baseline the course. The course has no targets, it has no structure, it has no stickiness, it has no embedding, and yet we think the learner is going to somehow magically create some marvelous stuff when they pitch up going, well, I don't know why I'm here, and if entertain me, or prove it to me, or well, if I can take one thing back, it'll be a good use of my time. Go on, get on with it. I mean, I've sat and watched trainers being absolutely tortured because they have to entertain people for a day, and of course, very rarely do they have the opportunity of saying, if you're not ready to learn, if this course isn't for you, go back to work. I have still to meet a trainer who's had the courage to do that. Maybe the fact that sometimes the trainers are evaluating their own work for the organisation is part of that problem. Who knows? Sticky or space learning is really interesting. Good concepts in here at the moment, and it's part of embedding as well. How do you make learning sticky is a really interesting concept. I worked with an organisation recently who were really all over this, and they were doing some excellent stuff. And of course, the reverse versus scrap learning. We've got so much stuff stuffed into learning on the sort of smorgasbord idea that something in there somewhere will appeal to someone. I was evaluating a course recently where the trainer was scooting through at least 27 different things because there was a bunch, 12 people in front of them that didn't really know why they were there. So it was like, how do you hook someone in? And of course, they were saying, well, I managed to hook someone at 2 o'clock this afternoon, but of course you'd lost everybody. It was poor. I mean, you've got to feel sorry for training companies sometimes because L&D people do not set them challenges. And that's for internal trainers as well. And there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out of tin can KPIs and open badges and such like the moment. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in technology, and perhaps the most interesting is virtual reality. Simulated learning, you've got to look at this now and say, if we're not careful in L&D, if we don't get all over this soon, this could be the end of us. And I can see some really interesting learning that's taking place now in medical training, medical and surgeons, detailed training. You've got to start thinking, why do we need L&D soon? I mean, arguably, why do we need HR? But soon, why do we need L&D? And that's a much bigger problem in my mind. So it's time to start getting a grip of VR and showing the value that we add as consultants and strategists around learning and organisational change, as well as just saying, do you fancy a few courses? Rant over. So one of the processes we use is one of these forecasting things where we pretty well know the forecast range of just about any course that you can think of. And so we establish a range, we create the forecast by looking at a range of the sort of forecast things which are going on in the organisation. Things like if you don't embed, we know the forecast within the range will be lower. Things like there's no targets, the forecast range will be lower. So we've got a way of doing this that allows you to pump in the course, a number of drivers, and it will give you an output figure. And over the course of the research that's been carried out here, pretty rigorous research, we're within 95% accuracy at 10% of the cost of traditional evaluation approaches. And let's not even think about Kirkpatrick, because at least most of the summative evaluation approaches work. I mean, Jack Phillips's idea is about measuring ROI, at least credible, whereas the Kirkpatrick thing is, as we all know, vaporware. Another thing that's interesting is utility theory. Contentious, but it allows us to put some measures around the sorts of courses which are hard to measure, the sort of really soft cultural courses, soft personal development, mindfulness, things like that. Sometimes I remember, we go back to the beginning of that sentence. Years ago, I remember people saying, wouldn't it be great if we could measure morale? Wouldn't it be great if we measure confidence? Well, now we can, because this is a measure of both morale and confidence. And our engagement scores allow you to attribute a value to a program. It will never be very high ROI, but it can be ROI. And that's a good thing, because actually that sort of training is really important for us to do. That sort of innovation and learning is part of how we add value. After the event of evaluations, tons of methods Jack Phillips had mentioned, but I love the old success case method, very fast. And we often combine our forecasting method with the success case method, which is about sampling approach, effectively. Rubrics are all the rage in down under. And in education, I'm not a fan myself. We talked about the baseline thing earlier. Personally don't like it, but some people like it. Stakeholder audits are great. You know, sort of what's your expectations, the old return on expectations idea. And at the bottom, the idea of control groups using the academic sort of philosophy is good as well. If you've got a pilot, you know, this group went through it, this group didn't, what were the differences? And that's all lovely-dovely, but a lot of work. And there's all sorts of problems with control groups. In fact, one of the biggest control groups studies ever taken in history was the difference between two groups of learners, one who were put on a placebo course called Intention to Train, and another group that went on the real course. And the group that actually went on the non-course did better in the results afterwards. I think that's called the Hawthorne effect. That's a real problem for us, because actually something we need to be thinking about is the validity of some of these control group and academic research things. They're great for academia, but not always great for us as practitioners. So again, this after the event process is here. It's so easy when you write it down on a bunch of slides like this. And I know people who've been through some of the big ROI methodologies and come out and talk to me and say, I'm still no clearer. And that's how you do it here. It's as simple as that. And it's a very straightforward process. I mean, Jack Phillips' idea isn't new. It just applied it to evaluation. And good luck to him, because it is good. But it's tricky, it's difficult, it takes a lot of time. So, as we said, these are the key questions. Please ask them. Please challenge yourself. Please let's move L&D into organisational development. Let's be more strategic. Let's really sort of stiffen our own knowledge and our processes. We can help you with that. You can help us with that. We love it. This is what we're about. We're about changing the culture, as you can imagine, of L&D. And, you know, sometimes HR as well, dare I say it. So our book's coming soon. We've been talking about it all year, but it really will be coming soon now. The proofs are being sort of put together. We're putting together some online courses and some coaching. You can ring us up, you can talk to us. We meet many people. We speak with management teams, L&D groups, and conferences and all that sort of malarkey. And we're very happy to come and help you rebuild your process or change your processes. People usually seem quite excited at the end of our sessions with them. So, you know, maybe we've got something new to say. Any questions? Please get in touch. My address is russell@qedod.com. You can catch me at russell@trainingevaluation.com if you want that. qedod.com. Current evaluation activity is another place to catch me. Don't be shy. Contact me, disagree with me, challenge me, agree with me. Give us a ring. Janet will sort out a meeting if you want. Love to keep engaging. We're very passionate about L&D, as you can hopefully tell. And let's work together to keep proving the value. Till the next one, goodbye.